Welcome to the Art Channel. In this film we're visiting Tate Britain to see an exhibition called Van Gogh and Britain.
The exhibition explores Van Gogh's time and his relationship with London, where he lived for several years in the 1870s. Before he became a painter, he worked for an art dealer and later on worked for the church and also as a teacher. So this is really a period of time where he's trying to discover who he is as a young man and a painter.
And the exhibition also establishes the influence of Van Gogh on a whole generation of British painters. And so it's part of a series of shows that Tate Britain has staged looking at the impact of major continental modernist painters and artists on British art and culture.
Here we see Van Gogh's rendition of Prison Exercise, this exercise yard, this incredibly claustrophobic space. And it's based very closely on his observations of a Gustave Doré print, which is in turn based on Newgate Prison. I think it's really vital to remember that Van Gogh is interested and appalled and fascinated by social conditions. He's come to this huge buzzing city. He's interested in how people live and inequities. He's reading Victor Hugo and Dickens while he's in London. So he's engaged with what's going on around him.
While he lives here, he spends many hours walking through the city, observing the extraordinary pace of change of the modern world. London is really the leading city of the world, and he's someone who is very engaged in kind of contemporary British culture, consuming it through prints and through novels. So he's constantly kind of teaching himself and at the same time formulating his views on sort of contemporary social conditions, and you can see that encapsulated in this one prison, which would have been a very harsh place to be incarcerated.
Sunflowers by Van Gogh, something we're very familiar with, but coming back to these paintings, you see how it was a very important motif for him. These huge, ungainly flowers stuck into this pot. He's looking at the cycle of life and death. You see the flowers through all their stages. And interestingly, he balances the flowers, the heaviness on one side, and these were made to decorate his house for his friend Gauguin's visit.
Yeah, these sunflowers have this kind of elemental truth to them. They are so lively, so entrancing that they mesmerize you, really. They celebrate nature in all of its joy and tragedy. It's a painting that really asks you to consider why Van Gogh remains an artist who is revered, who somehow manages to touch us.
We're looking here at one of many self-portraits. Van Gogh is famous for his self-portraits, and we are still completely fascinated by Van Gogh and his, I think, relationship with us and his relationship with painting and his struggles. And so these self-portraits are always still very engaging and very visceral. And here we see a typical self-portrait of his, a three-quarter profile, cropped in this very lively surface of paint. And somebody who is exploring the way he is, the way he looks throughout his life.
Yes, there are two self-portraits in the exhibition, one of 1887, an earlier one, which is very sort of jaunty. It sort of illustrates his confidence as an artist, as a maverick, as a visionary, and there's an extraordinary kind of handling of the paint. And he's wearing a tie in this early portrait. Later, in 1889, you can see over the passage of 2 years, he's become almost emaciated, he's gaunt, you can see his mental struggles, but he still presents himself as an artist, holding his brushes and a palette.
I think when I look at the Van Gogh paintings, you know, we come back to them time and time again, but they are, as you say, that the brushwork is amazing and they are constructed, they're built. They almost feel like somebody making sculpture. I think the question always remains why we're still looking at Van Gogh. What are we in love with? Why are crowds arriving at Tate Britain to see an exhibition like this? We've all seen lots of Van Goghs before, but we keep coming back. And I think we are partly in love with the painting and partly in love with the romance. I think, as you say, there's no denying that Van Gogh has become the archetypal suffering artist, and we think we can kind of squeeze into his mind by looking at these paintings.
Yes, I mean the mystique and myth of Van Gogh and his life is still very powerful and appealing. That notion of the outsider, the wanderer, the seeker of truth. And Van Gogh himself talks about why he is an artist, because he is a seeker, but in that process he doesn't always find the truth. So it's that journey, that search, that lies at the heart of this myth, but also, of course, in Van Gogh's own professed set of motivations. But fundamentally, I think you have to come back to the paintings, set aside the biography, and enjoy them for their extraordinary vitality.
Van Gogh was an intensely religious human being. He had a close relationship with his God. And I think, although we may not, they are paintings about being alive. They are paintings about the struggle to be a human being and our relationship with each other and with the world. And that sounds terribly romantic, but I think Van Gogh, as you say, kind of hypes up the truth so much. They are very real still. We tend to assume that Van Gogh spends all of his time in the south of France, a kind of lost and wandering soul. Actually, he's a very sophisticated human. He's incredibly well read. He's well travelled. He's seen lots of paintings. He's spent his formative years here in London. So it redresses the balance to some extent.
I think the most important thing is the way in which we can understand Van Gogh as a cosmopolitan artist, as someone who really immersed himself in British life of the 1870s and learnt from it through observation, through participation. And so, in that sense, the exhibition is really revealing.